Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. An immersive summary. It felt like something bad was going to happen at Malfoy Manor. The Death Eaters all got together in the rich dining room. Their faces were hidden, and they were in awe. At the head of the long table sat Lord Voldemort, his serpentine features illuminated by flickering candlelight, red eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. The Dark Lord's followers sat in tense silence, aware that their master's mood could shift from pleased to murderous in an instant. Above their heads, suspended in mid-air by invisible bonds, Professor Charity Burbage writhed helplessly. The Muggle Studies teacher's eyes were wide with terror as she recognized some of her former colleagues among the assembled Death Eaters. Voldemort's voice cut through the silence like a blade, his words dripping with disdain as he spoke of blood purity and the contamination of magical society. With casual cruelty that sent shivers through even his most devoted followers, he ended Burbage's life with a simple curse before summoning his massive serpent, Nagini. The snake's deadly embrace was swift, and the horrific feast that followed served as both sustenance for the beast and a chilling reminder of the Dark Lord's absolute power. Meanwhile, miles away a little whinging, Harry Potter sat in his small bedroom at Privet Drive, surrounded by newspapers and magical documents that painted conflicting pictures of his beloved mentor. The weight of Dumbledore's complex past pressed down on him as he read Rita Skeeter's sensationalized biography, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Questions about Grindelwald, about Ariana, about the very nature of the man he had trusted above all others, swirled in his mind like a storm. The familiar confines of his childhood prison felt more suffocating than ever as he prepared for what he knew would be his final departure from this place that had never truly been home. Downstairs, the Dursleys moved through their own preparations with barely concealed anxiety. Vernon's bluster had given way to genuine fear as order members arrived to escort them to safety. Petunia's hands trembled as she packed their belongings, her usual composure cracking under the weight of a magical world she had spent decades trying to ignore. Even Dudley seemed subdued, the reality of danger finally penetrating his thick skull. As protective enchantments were woven around them and plans for their relocation finalized, the artificial normalcy that had defined Privet Drive for so many years crumbled like a house of cards, leaving only the stark truth that war had finally come to claim everyone, magical and muggle alike. The air above Little Whinging felt funny when 7 of the same Harry flew out from the Dursleys on brooms and animals. The Polyjuice potion had worked its magic, transforming 6 brave Order members into perfect replicas of the boy who lived. What should have been a clever deception quickly turned into a nightmare as Death Eaters materialized from the darkness like vengeful shadows, their black robes billowing against the starlit canvas above. The ambush was swift and merciless. Curses streaked through the air in deadly ribbons of green and red light, turning the peaceful suburban evening into a battlefield of screams and explosions. Harry watched in horror as his beloved owl Hedwig fell from the sky, her snowy feathers scattered by a killing curse meant for him. The loss cut deeper than any physical wound, but worse was yet to come. Mad-Eye Moody, the grizzled aura whose paranoid vigilance had kept so many alive, plummeted earthward after his own flying creature was struck down. The man who had survived countless battles against dark wizards met his end in the very mission designed to protect the boy he had sworn to guard. When Harry finally reached the burrow, battered and traumatized, he found refuge in the warm embrace of the Weasley family. His 17th birthday arrived with bittersweet celebration, marked not by cake and laughter alone, but by the solemn visit of Minister Scrimgeour. The stern-faced official delivered Dumbledore's final gifts with bureaucratic coldness, a golden snitch that refused to open, a children's book of fairy tales, and Godric Gryffindor's sword that the Ministry claimed as their own. Each bequest felt like a puzzle piece from beyond the grave, their purposes as mysterious as the man who had left them behind. The fragile piece shattered completely during Bill and Fleur's wedding when a silver doe Patronus bounded into the tent with devastating news. The Ministry had fallen. Scrimgeour was dead. The war that had been brewing in shadows now erupted into the light with terrifying swiftness. As wedding guests disapparated in panic and protective charms crumbled around them, Harry felt the last vestiges of his childhood slip away like sand through his fingers. The hunt for Horcruxes that lay ahead would demand everything he had left to give, but first he had to survive long enough to begin the quest that would determine the fate of the wizarding world. The wedding chaos still echoed in their ears as Harry, Ron and Hermione materialized on the bustling streets of London, their hearts hammering against their ribs like caged birds desperate for escape. The Muggle world enveloped them in its familiar anonymity, honking cars, chattering pedestrians, and the comforting smell of exhaust fumes that meant civilization and safety. Or so they thought. Their relief lasted barely long enough to draw breath before two figures in dark robes emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, wands already raised with deadly intent. The cafe became their battlefield, ceramic cups exploding into razor-sharp fragments as curses ricocheted off walls painted cheerful yellow just moments before. Hermione's quick thinking saved them all, a memory charm that wiped the attackers' minds clean, while Harry and Ron struggled to process how quickly Death Eaters had found them. The trio huddled in the aftermath, surrounded by unconscious muggles and broken crockery, realizing with cold dread that nowhere was truly safe anymore. The war had followed them into the very heart of London, its tendrils reaching everywhere like poison through water. Their investigation into the mysterious RAB led them down a rabbit hole of black family secrets that painted Sirius's younger brother in an entirely new light. Regulus Black, once dismissed as another Death Eater casualty, emerged from the shadows of history as an unlikely hero who had discovered Voldemort's terrible secret. The young man had stolen the real locket, Horcrux, replacing it with a fake, and died for his defiance, a sacrifice that had gone unrecognized for decades, while Harry risked everything for what turned out to be worthless metal and glass. When they finally coaxed the truth from Kreacher, the house elf's anguished tale unfolded like a nightmare made real. His beloved Master Regulus had used him to help destroy Voldemort's Horcrux, but the locket had been stolen by Mundungus Fletcher, that petty thief who couldn't resist pilfering from Grimmauld Place. As Kreacher's rheumy eyes filled with tears for his lost master, Harry felt the weight of another person's sacrifice pressing down on his shoulders. The hunt for Horcruxes had begun in earnest, but it came with the bitter knowledge that they were walking in the footsteps of someone who had already paid the ultimate price for the same cause. As they neared the big magic place, you could feel something in the morning. 3 people walked up, ready but new. Harry, Ron and Hermione had shed their own identities like discarded cloaks, the bitter polyjuice potion still burning their throats as they assumed the forms of Ministry employees. The shiny phone booth looked scary, but they moved ahead to locate a piece of Voldemort's soul inside. The Ministry's main room had lots of normal, messy magic work going on. Witches and wizards hurried by, not noticing the 3 people hiding there. Harry's borrowed face felt foreign as he navigated the labyrinthine corridors, while Hermione's meticulous planning guided them through security checkpoints and past curious glances. The deeper they ventured into the bowels of the building, the more oppressive the atmosphere became, as if the very walls exhaled the corruption that had seeped into the heart of magical government. When they finally cornered Umbridge in her pink-draped office, the woman's saccharine smile couldn't mask the malevolence that radiated from the golden locket hanging at her throat. The Horcrux pulsed with dark energy, feeding off her cruelty and amplifying it tenfold. What followed was a desperate gamble, a carefully orchestrated deception that saw the locket finally torn from Umbridge's neck, the piece of Voldemort's soul secured at last. But victory came at a devastating price. Their escape erupted into chaos as alarms shrieked through the Ministry corridors and snatchers appeared from every shadow. Spells flew like deadly fireworks as the trio fought their way through waves of pursuers, their bodies accumulating cuts and bruises with each desperate leap and stumble. By the time they managed to disapparate to safety, they were bloodied, breathless, and utterly alone, their safe houses compromised, their support network shattered, and nothing but the clothes on their backs and a piece of ancient evil clutched in Hermione's trembling hands. The wizarding world had become a hunting ground, and they were now its most wanted prey. The countryside stretched endlessly before them, a patchwork of brown fields and skeletal trees that mirrored the desolation growing in their hearts. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had become ghosts haunting the British landscape, flitting from one makeshift camp to another as autumn surrendered to winter's bitter embrace. The locket was cursed. When they wore it, they felt like badness was getting into their heads. Their solid friendship started to break because of no food, no sleep, and mean words from Voldemort's broken soul. The trio's conversations grew shorter, sharper, tinged with frustrations they couldn't quite name. Things were bad for Ron. He looked tired because he was hungry, and the necklace made him feel like things won't be okay. The arguments started small disagreements about where to make camp, whose turn it was to keep watch, but they festered like untended wounds. When the explosion finally came, it shattered the fragile peace they'd been clinging to. Ron's accusations cut deep, his words poisoned by the Horcrux's influence as he hurled their failures at Harry like stones. Then he was gone, disapparating into the grey morning mist, leaving behind only the echo of his anger and a silence that felt like death itself. Harry and Hermione pressed on with hollow determination, their duo feeling incomplete, unbalanced. Desperation drove them to Godric's Hollow on Christmas Eve, hope flickering that they might find something, anything, to guide them forward. The snow-covered village looked peaceful enough, with warm lights glowing in cottage windows, but danger lurked behind the most innocent of facades. What they believed to be a meeting with Bathilda Bagshot, the historian who might hold crucial information, became a trap as deadly as any they'd encountered. The elderly woman's form melted away to reveal Nagini, Voldemort's monstrous serpent, her massive coils striking with lethal precision through the cramped cottage. Their escape came at a terrible cost. Harry's faithful Holly Wand, his first and most trusted magical companion, lay broken beyond repair in Hermione's shaking hands. As she wept over the fractured wood, Harry discovered another kind of breaking. The pages of Rita Skeeter's biography revealed Dumbledore's hidden past, his friendship with the dark wizard Grindelwald, and choices that cast shadows over everything Harry thought he knew. The man he'd revered as infallible had once harboured the same dangerous ambitions as those they now fought against. In that moment, sitting in their tiny tent with winter howling outside, Harry felt more alone than ever, betrayed by the living and the dead alike, carrying secrets that seemed to multiply like the very Horcruxes they sought to destroy. The forest pool lay mirror-still under a canopy of frost-laden branches when Ron first heard it, the Deluminator's gentle click echoing through his father's abandoned shed. The peculiar device Dumbledore had bequeathed him pulsed with warm light, and somehow, impossibly, it carried voices across the darkness, Hermione's voice, fragile with worry, speaking his name. The light danced from the Deluminator into his chest, settling near his heart like a compass needle finding true north, and Ron knew with absolute certainty that he had to follow where it led. When he materialized beside their tent, invisible beneath Harry's cloak, Ron witnessed a moment that would forever change how he saw his best friend. Harry was leading Hermione in a slow, careful dance to the tinny music from her radio, both of them moving like ghosts trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. There was nothing romantic in their swaying, only two broken souls offering each other the comfort of shared grief. Shame burned in Ron's throat as he watched, realizing how terribly wrong he'd been, how the Horcrux had twisted his fears into weapons against the people he loved most. The reunion exploded into violence before it could bloom into forgiveness. A silver doe had appeared in the forest, ethereal and beautiful, leading Harry to a frozen pool where Gryffindor's sword waited beneath the ice like Excalibur in its watery sheath. But as Harry descended into the black water, the locket sensed its doom and began to strangle him, its chain tightening like a garrote around his throat. Ron plunged into the freezing depths without hesitation, hauling his friend to safety before facing the Horcrux's final, desperate gambit. The locket split open like a malevolent flower, spewing forth Harry and Hermione's deepest fears given horrible form, visions of inadequacy, abandonment, and betrayal that cut deeper than any blade. But Ron raised the sword with trembling hands and brought it down with all the fury of his guilt and love, watching Voldemort's soul fragment shriek into nothingness. Their quest for answers led them to the strangest sanctuary imaginable, the Lovegood house, which spiraled toward the sky like a chess piece carved from imagination itself. Xenophilius Lovegood, wild-haired and desperate, spun them a tale that transformed their understanding of everything. The Deathly Hallows, 3 legendary objects that could make their bearer master of death itself. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak of Invisibility, items so powerful that even Dumbledore had sought them in his youth. As Luna's father sketched the triangular symbol with shaking hands, Harry felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a mantle made of starlight and shadow. But their enlightenment came with a price. Xenophilius's betrayal, driven by love for his captured daughter, as Death Eaters descended upon the house like ravens sensing carrion. The Snatchers still found them. They came from the land like wolves that wanted to eat after smelling food. Rough hands dragged them through the gates of Malfoy Manor, where crystal chandeliers cast cold light on scenes of unimaginable cruelty. In the drawing room, Bellatrix Lestrange prowled around them with the predatory grace of a cat with cornered mice, her blade carving the word Mudblood into Hermione's arm, while her screams echoed off marble walls. Meanwhile, in the cellar's suffocating darkness, Harry discovered they weren't the only prisoners. Luna, Ollivander, and Dean Thomas had been trapped in this underground hell, their faces gaunt with despair. Salvation came in the form of the most unlikely hero, Dobby, the house elf, whose freedom Harry had secured years earlier, appeared with the crack of apparition and the fierce loyalty of a creature who understood the true meaning of courage. Chandelier crystals rained down like deadly snow as the elf's magic shattered Bellatrix's torture chamber, giving them precious seconds to escape. But as they tumbled onto the beach at Shell Cottage, Dobby's small body crumpled onto the sand, Bellatrix's dagger protruding from his narrow chest. His tennis ball-sized eyes, usually so bright with mischief and joy, grew dim as he whispered his final words about freedom and friendship. Harry dug the grave with his own hands in the soft earth above the sea, each shovelful of soil a promise that Dobby's sacrifice would not be forgotten, while the waves below seemed to whisper their own eulogy for the bravest elf who ever lived. The ancient goblin's eyes glittered with centuries of accumulated grievance as Harry Potter sat across from him in the cramped confines of Shell Cottage. Griphook's gnarled fingers traced the outline of Gryffindor's sword with reverence and resentment in equal measure, while the trio watched him weigh their desperate proposal. The goblin's price for helping them infiltrate the impregnable fortress of Gringotts was steep, the legendary sword that had slain basilisks and destroyed Horcruxes. Harry's agreement tasted like ash in his mouth, knowing he was trading away a piece of Hogwarts itself. But Hufflepuff's cup waited somewhere in the deepest vaults, another fragment of Voldemort's shattered soul that had to be destroyed. The morning of the heist dawned grey and unforgiving as Hermione's trembling fingers worked their transformation magic. Polyjuice potion burned down their throats like liquid fire, reshaping bone and sinew until Harry became the hawk-faced Bogrod, and Hermione transformed into the wild-haired Bellatrix Lestrange. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, wearing the face of their torturer to commit the crime of the century. Griphook clung to Harry's back beneath the invisibility cloak as they descended into the marble halls of the Wizarding World's most secure bank, past goblin guards whose suspicious eyes seemed to pierce right through their disguises. The deeper they descended into Gringotts' labyrinthine depths, the more the ancient magic pressed against them like a living thing. Waterfalls cascaded over them, washing away their carefully constructed deceptions and leaving them exposed and desperate. The imperious curse flowed from Harry's wand like silk made of compulsion, bending the goblin guard's will to his own as they plunged ever deeper into the earth's heart. The cart that carried them shrieked along its tracks like a banshee, hurtling through passages carved from living rock toward vaults that had remained undisturbed for centuries. When they finally reached Bellatrix's vault, the sight that greeted them defied comprehension. Mountains of cursed treasure rose like golden dunes, each piece burning with protective enchantments that would incinerate the unworthy. The Gemino and Flagrante curses turned their search into a nightmare. Every item they touched multiplied and seared their flesh, threatening to bury them alive in molten gold. But there, nestled among the glittering hoard like a serpent in its nest, sat Hufflepuff's cup, its ancient badger emblem seeming to watch them with knowing eyes. Hermione's fingers closed around it, just as the vault's alarms began to wail like banshees announcing the end of the world. Their escape became a fever dream of impossible desperation. The dragon that had guarded the deepest vaults for decades was a creature of living nightmare, blind, scarred, and driven mad by years of captivity. Its scales were white as old bone, and its eyes had been blinded by centuries of darkness, leaving it dependent on sound and the painful clank of metal that signaled feeding time. But when Harry, Ron, and Hermione leaped onto its back, the ancient beast found something it had lost long ago, the memory of flight. Together they burst from Gringotts' depths like a phoenix rising from ashes, soaring over London's rooftops while the dragon's triumphant roar shattered windows and sent wizards scrambling for cover. As they finally tumbled from its back into a mountain lake, watching the magnificent creature disappear into the wild sky it had been denied for so long, they clutched Hufflepuff's cup like a hard-won piece of hope. One more Horcrux claimed, one step closer to the end of their impossible quest, though none of them could yet imagine the price that final victory would demand. The narrow streets of Hogsmeade felt different under the oppressive weight of Voldemort's reign, shadows seeming to cling longer to the cobblestones as Harry, Ron, and Hermione made their desperate approach. Their quest had led them here, to this village that once symbolized freedom and butterbeer-warmed afternoons, now patrolled by Death Eaters and shrouded in fear. When Aberforth Dumbledore's weathered hands pulled them through the secret passage behind his pub, the trio found themselves face to face with a man whose eyes held decades of buried pain and resentment. The revelations that spilled from Aberforth's lips struck Harry like physical blows. The truth about Ariana, about Grindelwald, about the fractures that had torn the Dumbledore family apart. Each word painted Albus in shades Harry had never imagined, transforming the wise mentor he'd idolized into a flawed, guilt-ridden man whose mistakes had cost his sister her life. The weight of these secrets pressed down on Harry's shoulders as he realized that even his greatest hero had feet of clay, that the war against darkness was far more complex than he'd ever understood. Through the passage behind Ariana's portrait, they emerged into a Hogwarts transformed beyond recognition. The castle that had once been his sanctuary now crawled with Carrows and their reign of terror, its corridors echoing with the screams of tortured students. But in the room of requirement, hope flickered like a candle in the darkness. Neville, Luna, and the remaining members of Dumbledore's army had not merely survived, but had grown into something fierce and unbreakable. Their faces bore new scars, their eyes held harder light, but their determination blazed brighter than ever. When they spoke of Ravenclaw's diadem, Harry felt the familiar surge of purpose, another Horcrux within his grasp. The confrontation with the Carrows erupted with all the fury of months of suppressed rage. Harry's magic crackled with righteous anger as he faced the torturers who had turned his beloved school into a prison of fear. But it was McGonagall's arrival that truly set the castle ablaze with hope. Her duel with Snape was a masterpiece of controlled fury, decades of mistrust and barely concealed contempt finally unleashed in a spectacular display of magical combat. As Snape fled through shattered windows, and McGonagall's voice rang out with commands to defend the castle, the very stones of Hogwarts seemed to stir with renewed life. The final battle was coming, and the ancient fortress prepared to make its stand against the gathering storm of darkness. The darkness had finally come to claim Hogwarts. Voldemort's voice cut through the night like a blade of ice, his ultimatum echoing across the ancient grounds with supernatural clarity. The Dark Lord's words carried an impossible weight: surrender, Harry Potter, and the bloodshed would end. The silence that followed felt like the held breath of the entire wizarding world, suspended between hope and despair. Students and teachers alike stood frozen in that terrible moment, knowing that whatever choice was made would forever alter the course of history. When the battle erupted, it came with the fury of a hurricane unleashed. The very foundations of Hogwarts trembled as spells crashed against stone, as friends became warriors, and as the corridors that had once echoed with laughter now rang with the screams of the wounded and dying. The ancient magic woven into the castle's bones seemed to pulse with defiance, but even centuries of protective enchantments could not shield everyone from the horror that had come calling. In the midst of the chaos, Fred Weasley's laughter was silenced forever, that irrepressible spark of joy and mischief extinguished in an explosion of stone and spell, leaving a wound in the hearts of all who knew him that would never fully heal. Through the carnage, Harry moved like a ghost haunted by purpose, drawn inexorably toward the boathouse where death waited in its most twisted form. Hidden in the shadows, he watched in horror as Voldemort's serpent struck with mechanical precision, its fangs finding their mark in Severus Snape's throat. The potions master's black eyes, which had held so many secrets for so long, began to dim as his life ebbed away onto the wooden planks. In those final moments, Snape's gaze found Harry's, and with trembling hands he offered up his most precious memories, silvery strands of truth that would reshape everything Harry thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and the man he had spent years believing was his enemy. The weight of those memories felt heavier than any burden Harry had ever carried, pregnant with revelations that would either save or damn them all. The silvery memories poured into the Pensieve like liquid starlight, each strand containing years of hidden truth. Harry descended into Snape's past with trembling hands, unprepared for the emotional devastation that awaited him. Scene after scene unfolded like pages torn from a forbidden book, a young Severus Snape falling hopelessly in love with Lily Evans, his childhood friend whose green eyes would haunt him for decades. Harry watched his mother's kindness bloom in those memories, saw how she defended the awkward, greasy-haired boy from Slytherin even as his own father tormented him. The most crushing revelation came in waves: Snape's desperate plea to Dumbledore to save Lily, his anguished cry when she died anyway, and his vow to protect her son, the boy who bore her eyes, but his father's face, a living reminder of both his greatest love and deepest humiliation. But the memories held an even darker secret, one that shattered Harry's understanding of his own existence. He was not meant to survive this war. He was Voldemort's final Horcrux, carrying a piece of the Dark Lord's soul within him, like a cancer that could only be excised through death. Dumbledore had known all along, had raised him like a pig for slaughter, nurturing him with just enough love and hope to ensure he would walk willingly to his execution when the moment came. The headmaster's words echoed through the memory like a death knell. Harry must die, and he must die by Voldemort's hand, for only then could the monster be truly destroyed. The walk through the Forbidden Forest felt like a journey through purgatory, each step carrying Harry closer to an inevitable end he now understood he must embrace. The ancient trees seemed to lean in like mourners at a funeral, their branches creating a cathedral of shadows overhead. With shaking fingers, Harry turned the resurrection stone 3 times, and the forest filled with the translucent forms of those who had loved him most. His parents stood before him, young and radiant as they had been in life, their faces glowing with pride and infinite tenderness. Sirius appeared with that familiar, reckless grin, while Lupin's gentle eyes held all the wisdom and courage Harry would need for what lay ahead. They did not speak of his fear or try to dissuade him. Instead, they simply walked beside him, their presence a balm against the terror that threatened to overwhelm his resolve. When Harry finally faced Voldemort in that moonlit clearing, he did so with the quiet dignity of a martyr ascending to his fate. The killing curse struck him like a thunderbolt of green fire, and the world exploded into nothingness, only to reform in the strangest place of all. The ethereal King's Cross station stretched before him, all gleaming white marble and impossible architecture, where Dumbledore waited with tears in his ancient eyes. Here, in this liminal space between life and death, the full truth was finally laid bare. Harry had died, yes, but only the piece of Voldemort's soul within him had been destroyed. He could choose to return, to finish what had been started. The maimed thing cowering beneath the bench, pitiful and beyond help, was all that remained of Voldemort's fractured soul. As understanding dawned, Harry felt the weight of destiny shift from burden to choice, from sacrifice to salvation, knowing that his return would herald not just his own redemption, but the dawn of a world finally free from the shadow of the Dark Lord's reign. After Harry fell, it got very still. You could feel the quiet, and the air felt different. But in that ethereal space between worlds, where the gleaming arches of an impossible King's Cross station stretched into infinity, Harry Potter made the choice that would define not just his own fate, but the destiny of the wizarding world. The decision to return carried with it the knowledge that Voldemort's greatest weapon, the piece of his soul that had lived within Harry, was now destroyed, leaving the Dark Lord mortal and vulnerable for the first time in decades. When Harry's eyes opened in the Forbidden Forest, feigning death with the skill of a master actor, the tide of battle had already begun to turn. Hagrid's anguished cries as he carried what appeared to be Harry's lifeless body back to Hogwarts echoed through the dawn air, each sob a dagger to the hearts of those who had fought so desperately for their world's salvation. But even as Voldemort proclaimed his victory with venomous triumph, the seeds of his downfall were already sprouting. In the chaos that erupted when Harry revealed himself alive, Neville Longbottom, that quiet boy who had grown into a lion, drew the sword of Gryffindor from the burning sorting hat and struck down Nagini with a single, decisive blow. The serpent's death cry marked the destruction of Voldemort's final Horcrux, leaving the Dark Lord as mortal as any man. The final confrontation between Harry and Voldemort unfolded in the Great Hall like a dance choreographed by destiny itself. No longer protected by fragments of his soul scattered across the world, Voldemort's killing curse rebounded upon him with the inevitability of justice finally served. The Dark Lord's body crumpled to the ancient stones, empty eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling that had witnessed so much magic and wonder, his reign of terror ending not with apocalyptic destruction, but with the quiet finality of a candle flame extinguished. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of wands clattering to the floor as witches and wizards across the hall realized that the war, their war, was finally over. 19 years later, Platform 9 3/4 was full of the usual noise as the Hogwarts Express left, but new kids were getting on the red train. Harry stood among the crowd of parents, his own children clutching their trunks and owl cages, their eyes bright with the same mixture of excitement and nervousness he had once felt. The scar on his forehead had not pained him in all these years. It remained merely a reminder of a past that had shaped but no longer defined him. Hermione and Ron stood nearby with their own daughter, while the autumn air carried the promise of new adventures and fresh beginnings. As the train pulled away in a cloud of steam and childhood dreams, Harry watched until it disappeared around the bend, knowing that the world his children were entering was one where love had triumphed over fear, where the darkness had been vanquished, not by power or cunning, but by the simple, enduring magic of those willing to sacrifice everything for others.